In a couple of my previous videos, I went through the diagnostic criteria for PTSD and complex PTSD. And this diagnostic criteria is obviously something that an appropriate healthcare or medical professional will use to make a decision of diagnosis. Now, one way, and arguably the best way to do this, is to assess through a clinical interview. In other words, you will explain your experience to a professional and they will map your experience onto the diagnostic criteria. We also have another tool available to us which can be helpful in the assessment process, and that is through questionnaire. One of the most common questionnaires, and the one used in NHS talking therapy services, is called the PCL5, which stands for the PTSD checklist, and the 5 meaning it aligns with DSM-5. This is a 20-question self-report measure that assesses the 20 symptoms listed in the DSM-5 for PTSD. So basically, it's a questionnaire that mirrors the DSM-5. And questionnaires can be really helpful. They can act as a screening tool to decide whether further investigation into PTSD is appropriate. They can be used to make a provisional or working diagnosis, and they can be used to monitor symptom change during and after any treatment, so we can see if that treatment is effective or not. Just as an aside here, where I work and live in England, if you use a questionnaire without a clinical interview and you score above the threshold on that questionnaire, then you should be treated the same as if you had a clinical interview. NICE Guidance, so that's the National Institute for Health and Social Care Excellence, who offers guidance for treatment, refers to this as a clinically important symptoms. They say people with clinically important symptoms of PTSD refer to those who are assessed as having PTSD on a validated scale, in this case the PCL5, that is a validated scale, as indicated by baseline scores above the clinical threshold, but who do not necessarily have a diagnosis of PTSD. They are typically referred to in studies that have not used a clinical interview to arrive at a formal diagnosis of PTSD and instead have only used self-report measures of PTSD symptoms. So that talks about how they are referred to in studies, but if we look at the actual guidance from NICE for treatment, it refers to people who have a formal diagnosis and people who have clinically important symptoms. And here are a couple of examples of what I mean on the screen. So let's take a look at the PCL5 so you can understand how to use it. There's a good website and it's called onlinecbtresources.co.uk, which has a load of questionnaires to fill out online. I'm not affiliated with them in any way. I have no idea who runs that website, but what I do know is that there are a lot of websites where you fill out the questionnaire and then before it gives you a score, it asks for your email address. And then they email you the results because they want to harvest your data. They want to advertise stuff to you later, or perhaps even sell the data that you've given them. And I absolutely hate that. My advice, stay away from those kind of sites, especially when you can access sites that don't do that. So on this website, it doesn't take any of your personal details at all, including your email address. You fill out the form and it gives you the result. Let's take a quick look. So down here, we have a list of problems and there's 20 of them. And these problems should be a response to a stressful or traumatic experience. If you've watched my video on the criteria for PTSD, then this event or experience is what we refer to as criteria A in that video. And what we think about is how often have you been bothered by the problem in the last week? So please remember, this is how often you have been bothered, not how often have you experienced it. And I'll explain a bit more about that in a moment. And the options you have are not at all. So it hasn't bothered me at all. It's bothered me a little bit. It's bothered me moderately. It's bothered me quite a bit. And it's bothered me extremely. Not at all scores a 0 and extremely scores a 4 with the other points in between as you would expect. Now these terms, a little bit, moderately, quite a bit and extremely, don't have definitions. They are subjective and it's up to you to decide what they mean to you. So the first one here, in the last week, how bothered have you been by having repeated, disturbing and unwanted memories of the stressful experience? So if you have experienced no repeated disturbing or unwanted memories, then you would select not at all. If, and I don't know how likely this is, but this is to explain the point about being bothered. If you have repeated disturbing and unwanted memories every day of the week, but for some reason they don't bother you, then again you would select not at all. If you do have these types of memories and they do bother you, then you're going to have to decide to what degree they bother you. Do they bother you a little bit? Is it moderate? Is it quite a bit? Or is it extremely? Question 2, the same again, but this time it's asking about disturbing dreams. So you probably want to consider how many nights of the week you are having them. And when you do have them, how long do they keep you up for? Do you actually go back to bed or back to sleep afterwards? Maybe you wake up, realize it was a dream, and then you fall straight back asleep again. Maybe you don't have dreams at all about the event, and therefore you choose not at all. Everyone's experience is different. So you work your way down the questionnaire and you answer all 20 questions. And when you are done, you press this total button and it gives you a number. The lowest score you can get is 0 and the highest score you can get is 80. Generally speaking, and this includes where I work, a total score of 32 or over would indicate symptoms of PTSD and that someone may benefit from PTSD treatment. There are other ways to interpret the results, but total score is by far the easiest way if you aren't a clinician. As the questionnaire is based upon the DSM-5 criteria, then you can work out from this more precisely which criteria cluster is met and to what extent. But for the purpose of this video and the audience who are likely to be watching this, the total score is good enough. And there we have it. That's probably the best way you can screen yourself as a self-assessment tool for PTSD. The PCL5 is, in my clinical experience, the most used questionnaire for this purpose. If you have any questions about this, drop it in the comments below and I will do my best to answer. Take care, everyone. Goodbye.